Welcome back to a live reading of The Effigy of Love, as written by Tony Sjöblom and read by Juho Hankela. This is Chapter 9, Guided by the Twin Stars. Grethelin never sent for him. Endrik did not know, nor did he care to guess why, because it only meant he was afforded some much-needed time to conjure up a plan on how to save her from the hellhole that had become her prison. Having racked his brain and gone through multiple imaginary scenarios, from theatricals to criminal aggression, it turned out that the simplest way was the best way, as things usually are. Thus, after the 12th bell had tolled, and Myrtle and whoever stood guard outside had finished their duties, Endrik shrouded himself in shadows and scurried like a rat down the winding corridors of the East Wing, down the steep stairs into the warm void and back again. He couldn't believe how easy it had been. The servants had all vanished like smoke in the air after the 12th bell, and there were no guards to speak of. Then again, for as long as he had lived, there had never been an outside threat on the people's lives. Thus, there simply was no need for heightened security. Indeed, the real monsters lived in the heart of the castle, regrettably. Alas, the joy was fleeting, as solving the problem of reclaiming the painting had only added another problem to the equation: where to hide her. It was clear Mother had her vicious eyes set on Endrik and his goings in the castle, but he couldn't simply part with her. The mere thought of giving her up when he finally basked in her presence and was able to lay his eyes on her, that alluring entity of love, realized, was cleaving his heart and soul in two. But she wasn't safe here, and never would be. Grethelin was watching from somewhere, somehow, at the edge of her web, with venomous fangs eager to strike, rend, and tear his world apart. Though time was of the essence, Endrik had not been able to take his eyes off the painting since he got back. Sitting by the hearth, watching the crackling fire light up the scene he had painted yesterday was mesmerizing. It was striking how much it looked like her, even though he had only caught a glimpse of her once, and painted her in the darkness, blind as a bat, guided only by his strange feelings. A feeling he could feel even now, as he watched her green eyes, those bright twin stars. They had such depth, one found oneself transported to another world when looking into them. Her full lips, slightly parted, whispered the sweetest secrets in his ears, though not a single word was uttered. Her hair was like captured silvery moonlight, swaying in the warm breeze, revealing soft, bare skin that longed for his touch. Her slender fingers, tightly gripping the bark of the tree, yearned to interlock with his fingers, to dance across a grey world and turn it into a sea of colors. The thought of losing it all made Endrik's heart bleed and thoughts grow greyer than the castle walls. He dried the single tear that streaked his cheek with the back of his hand and looked around the drawing room, desperate for answers. The flames in the hearth smeared long, thick shadows over the room as Endrik huddled in front of it, her lithe frame resting softly in his hand. In the darkness, his bedchamber didn't seem like a room at all. The door looked like a black gate leading into the unknown, and the cupboard and easel, barely visible as the fire flared, reminded him more of a wide tree than furniture. The chair, hidden underneath his cloak, looked like a lichen-covered rock. His bed looked like a copse of trees. The slender bedposts carried lush, verdant crowns, while the hanging canopy looked like branches burdened with the weight of ripe fruit. As his mind drifted, Endrik suddenly inhaled sharply and turned back to her. "The forest, of course," he whispered, as the manifested vision evaporated. All of his life his father and mother both had warned him of the dangers lurking outside the castle walls, warned him about the greedy or murderous rabble, or the hungry wolves in the forest. But now the only safe place was out there, in the dark woods, as far away from the reaches of the castle as possible. He rose to his feet and picked her up between his hands. It wasn't the largest of paintings, making it easy enough to smuggle away without much effort in the dark castle halls. But how he would get it to the pond in one piece, in the middle of the night, was another question. No matter how automated his movements were from having visited the pond regularly all his life, Knowing the intricate position of every sharp rock and gnarly root on his self-made path, he had never run through the woods burdened with such a fragile treasure before. Even a single misstep could spell disaster, and carrying a torch to light the way would spell certain death for him. No matter if he was Noble or Ravel, no matter if it was Captain Felth or any other guard on the ramparts, if fire was seen in the forest, they would shoot on sight. It was a grim truth he had witnessed far too many times to want to relive again, especially on the receiving end of the arrow. The wind suddenly pressed hard against the castle, blowing the window open and turning the curtains into vertical waves. Hendrik felt his skin prickle, but not from the cold wind sweeping across his feet. No, what made his skin prickle was the thought of losing her. The window could easily be replaced by the door, and the window by his father, mother, or whoever she had enlisted to do the spying and stealing of his belongings. Indeed, each second wasted daydreaming about what could happen was like waiting for the executioner's blade to fall. In fact, wasting time like this was like inviting the executioner into his chamber. No, it was do or die, and if the window opening on itself wasn't a premonition that the time was indeed now, then there was no such thing as a god looking out for man. Hendrik lifted the decorated room divider in front of the hearth to make sure no one would see him or his shadow by the window. Then, leaning against the window recess, Hendrik felt the cold autumnal wind whip his face and hands as he looked toward the forest. Somewhere out there, in a sea of black, lay the pond, his haven, her home. He knew he would make it there and back well before dawn, but it was a great risk to carry her with him out from the chamber and into the woods nonetheless. And leaving her there, all alone in the cold embrace of autumn, what would become of her? Would the painting crumble into a soggy mess when the harsh rain started pouring? Would all of the colors mix and turn into a brown or gray slop? Would his castle of clouds turn into an ephemeral ruin? As his hope diminished with every new and depressing thought, a golden gleam called out to him from the darkness like a twinkling star on the ground. I have no other choice, do I? Hendrik turned to the painting and saw that same golden gleam shining in those green eyes of hers. With a sullen smile carved onto his face, he looked over his shoulder at the grey mass that covered the sky and whispered, God, if you haven't abandoned us completely yet, please grant me the speed and courage I need to make it there and back safely. Though no one answered his prayer, Hendrik hoped God or fate would be on his side as he dressed himself in shadows and silence. He picked her up in a steady yet gentle grip underneath his arm, put his ear to the door, then opened it slowly. As it opened, a shadow spilled out into the corridor with such haste that had anyone seen it, they would have thought it a ghost. Indeed, Hendrik flew down the corridors and stairs, melding with the shadows as if they were one, through the storage window and over the ramparts, all with such ease and grace, one would think he was a part of the wind. Not before long, he already stood by the ford, heart beating loudly in his ears as he pressed himself against the castle wall and drew deep, calming breaths. The night smelled like the grey behind his back, as if the rot and grey seeped through the castle walls. He flexed his fingers and took a better grip on the painting. His hands were sweaty and dirty, and he could only hope that he hadn't sullied the painting during his escape from the castle. Then again, a little grime was nothing compared to what would befall her should he fail his mission. Above him flared torchlight. Was Tanner awake, or had the wind caused the torch to flare up? Skipping over 50 meters of slippery, wet rocks in near-perfect darkness was enough of a task, and Hendrik felt no need to add a hail of arrows to the equation. Alas, there was nothing he could do about it. It was as he had already said, do or die. Pressing the painting against his chest, he closed his eyes and took one final deep breath through his nose. Gone was the rank smell of grey, smoke and fire, dirty leather, incense and expensive perfumes, replaced by the gilded smell of her and the calming smell of the forest. He emptied his lungs slowly and opened his eyes. Though the world looked empty, black, it was filled with hope. Hope of getting to the pond safely. Hope of saving her. Beneath a moonless sky, The forest looked like an abyss, and the darkness would serve him well on his quest. He knew what he was doing, what he must do, and now that he flew with wings of urgency, nothing could stop him. The hardest part is behind me, and the most important still ahead. Spurred by determination and the courage God provided him, Endrik leaped into the darkness ahead. But it wasn't as easy as he had thought. His footing slipped more times than he cared to count, and since his one hand was busy clasping the painting, he had little to no chance of adjusting his balance. Fumbling and staggering in the middle of the ford, in the middle of the night, all he could do was pray there were no other casualties than his bloodied and bruised legs. They would heal over time, but a torn painting would be ruined forever. Soaking wet from the waist down, Endrik finally reached the other side and snuck behind an elm, its auburn crown a ward against the grey on the other side of the river. Clenching his jaw tight, a hot, red anger directed at himself for fumbling at such a critical moment in life, he threw a glance at the battlements. Judging by the lack of arrows, he had not been spotted. But if the painting had taken any collateral damage from his blunders was impossible to say. As his thoughts started running darker and his breath burned in his chest, something in the forest caught his attention. "It's you, isn't it?" He looked from the dark forest to the painting. The pond was roughly half an hour away, but he could once again hear, no, feel her reach out to him. Her invisible touch washed away all the anger, turning the red into green, as determination and urgency started fluttering in his bosom. As his jaw unclenched, a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, and he whispered, "I'm coming, my love." As soon as he took his first step into the black forest, he could feel himself being guided through the void. Two lights, one golden and one green, glimmered in the darkness. Twin stars beckoning him to follow, and follow he did. Like the night before, when they had danced across the canvas, they once again met in absolute darkness. Her invisible hand reached out to him, pulling him forward, sweeping away Endrik's fluttering impatience. He almost melted into the moss below his feet as his mind grew wild with passionate desire. Breathing deeply, he filled his lungs with her warmth, her presence, his love. He wanted nothing more but to hold his breath, hold her within him so close to his heart, but it was impossible. His body struggled against the desires of his mind, demanding he release her. But he did not need to despair, not now, not ever. As his feet flew lightly over the ground, he felt her lean, soft fingers wrap around his hand. It was like the smoothest silk on his skin, gently caressing as it pulled him forward. Step by step as they advanced together, Endrik's world slowly turned from a mass of black into a million shades of color as he stepped under a vault of 100 million stars. All of the questions, hesitations, and desperation he had recently held within him had vanished as they soared through and above the dark crowns of the trees, reached toward the veil of heaven, pierced the grey clouds, and finally bathed in the silvery light of the moon and the golden hue of the distant sun. Weightless, unburdened, Endrik knew not where he was anymore, nor did he care. All of the grey, mundane and cruel had been left behind him somewhere far below, out of reach and out of sight. He felt himself melting in her hand, as if he was clay being adhered to her, his grey, sorry soul becoming one with a being of pure love, warmth, and color. The rest of the world was left behind as they sped through another universe together. Wherever they soared, everything that once had been was no more except her, in his hand, in his heart, as they danced away the evil and the grey, turning bitter into sweet, cruel into beauty. Their souls sang a symphony that echoed between the stars as their fingers ventured high and low on the harp, lean fingers on smooth skin, the notes crescendoing toward a climax that would obliterate time and space as Endrik sunk like a pearl into a sea of colors and stars. Hours later, the last notes of their song slowly died out, and their beating hearts drummed their final beats of exhilaration, swearing an oath to never part. Only then, When all had passed and he felt safe, did Hendrik open his eyes. In the deepest of night, where light revealed nothing, his heart revealed her completely, lying next to him in all her preternatural beauty. Melting against his skin, glowing like a star, her touch was the wind that whispered the secrets of his heart, pressing them closer together still. Her warmth was the sun, perpetually shining even in the night. Her love was all and everything. Alas, time, that great teacher, had been obliterated only in Hendrik's mind. Before he even realized it, dawn already clawed at the mass of clouds, peeking down at a grey world. Opening his bleary eyes, Hendrik was quickly jarred out of his drowsiness as he realized he wasn't floating in a lake of love. Frantically, he looked next to him, only to find her missing from his side. Or rather, he found her sitting exactly where he had seen her for the first time, underneath that great, dark oak. Except it was not her, only the painting of her. Yet, in his delirious state of mind, that was enough to paint a smile as wide as the waxing moon on his lips, as he rose to his feet and slowly approached her. The warmth of 1,000 suns danced in his eyes as he touched her frame and whispered, "We made it, my love. We made it away from the grey and into something beautiful like a fairy tale, only real and only for you and me." The colors of his new world were swiftly swept aside by the rugged cry of a black, old crow. It made Hendrik's skin prickle and his guts twist and churn. If the crows were already dispersing, it meant he had far less time than he had hoped for. Had the bells already tolled? If so, how had he not heard it? With any luck, they had not, but luck was a scarce resource that was in high demand by each and every one. Yet, though the world seemed to slowly turn grey once more, the green and gold within his heart remained immaculate, perpetually shining bright. A light he craved more of, and did not want to abandon, yet had to. Before leaving for a grey world, he stroked the side of the painting and said, "I will be back as soon as I can. As often as I can, I promise."